Hey there, fellow nerds! We're about to dive into 10 RHCE-style tasks and solutions. Timestamps are in the description. This video assumes that you already know Ansible and you want to test your exam readiness. But if you are new or rusty or you want way more mock tasks, check out Alta 3 Academy. The link is in the description and it includes labs, a command line, videos, AI help, all in one spot. Let's get started. Question number 1. How can you create an Ansible playbook that verifies if specific services, such as HTTPD and MySQL, are running, starts them if they are not, and ensures they will automatically start on boot? Alright, so we're going to assume a few things for pretty much all these tasks. That we have an inventory, that it is written for our Red Hat machines, and we're also going to limit ourselves to just the resources that we would have access to on the exam, which unfortunately just means the Ansible documentation. Still, this is a classic use case for the service module, which you can look that up with the Ansible doc command. Here are the arguments we're going to need to know. Obviously, the name of the service that is required. State, it clearly states in the question. We want to make sure that this is started and enabled because we need to make sure that these services are enabled. For all of these documentation pages, you can always scroll all the way to the bottom where you'll find examples. Feel free to copy and paste these bad boys, which is pretty much exactly what I'm going to do. And there you have it. Now, we're going to put a play level become true because after all, we're going to need root privilege, assuming to be able to access these services and to make changes to them. And they're the same. You don't have to get fancy with this. Just copy and paste the same task twice. Make sure that you are calling out the service by its actual name. That's HTTPD and MySQL-D. And other than that, the parameters are exactly the same. So once we've got those all set and ready to go, we should be able to run these playbooks. I won't run every playbook that we do, but you can absolutely run and test these playbooks in our lab environment at Alta 3 Academy. Question number 2, how can you use a conditional task in Ansible to install an application on servers in different regions where the download source for the application varies by region? Well, let's pump the brakes first of all. First of all, the condition is something that you can set on the task no matter what the module for that task is. If we are downloading something, then that obviously means we want to reach for the get URL module. So again, I'm just going to be using the very simple example down from the bottom where we choose the location. We just need to make sure that we are setting a condition for it when we're done. So what we can assume is that the actual URLs as well as the destination to where these files are being saved will be provided by the prompt. But the point is that we need to set a condition. Something else that's also going to be established inside of your prompt is where is this condition located? If we need to know where the server is, then that's something that's likely going to be set as a variable, or perhaps in this case, let's take a look at our inventory file. There we go. So we can see that there are host variables inside of our inventory for a region, which means that we can use that as our condition inside of our task. So what we'll do is we'll hop back inside of here, and for each of these, we're going to set a when condition. When the value of region is the same as US. And of course, nobody likes typos. And if we pop that down here for EU, then this will satisfy the requirement. These conditions can come from all sorts of different places. They can be from the inventory, they can be from previous tasks, they can be from gather facts. So make sure that you are reading carefully and make sure you know about all the 20-some different places where variables can be set by Ansible. Question number 3, how would you create an Ansible playbook to automate daily backups of the Etsy directory on multiple servers, compress these backups, and store them in a specified backup location called /backup? All right, so there's a couple of things here we need to make sure that we do inside of this lab. First of all, we want to make sure that that backup location /backup even exists. So the file module is absolutely a great choice for that purpose. There's already a pre-made task down there in the examples, and I'm going to go ahead and steal that. Let's make sure that this directory exists. All right, tidy that up a bit. When you are using the file module and you are using it to create a directory, make sure that you include the state directory parameter. The mode is optional, but we might as well just keep what's inside of the example for now. Next, we're supposed to automate daily backups of a directory. Now, hold up a minute. You had me at the word daily. Whatever it is that we're supposed to do, if this is something that's expected to be done on a schedule, then this is a cron task, right? So what we need to do is take a look at the cron module. So this is just going to automate the cron tab settings inside of all of our different machines. And we should be so lucky that there is an example inside of the documentation that's almost exactly what it is that we want. But at the very least, we can find one that's pretty close. So if we grab this very first example there for cron, we can fill it out and show how this would be a solution to our third question. All right, so let's plug in what needs plugged in here in order for this to work. For the name parameter, name is referring to the description of a cron tab entry, or if env is set, the name of the environment variable. We ain't making an environment variable, so we can just give this any old name. Let's just call it daily etc backup, because that's pretty descriptive. So what is super annoying with cron, of course, is that you have to remember how a cron expression works. Fortunately, with Ansible, you don't have to do that. You can just specify what minute should the job run. Now, this doesn't say when this task is supposed to go. So I don't know, let's just say the very first minute, so that's 0. And for hour, it's the exact same thing, the hour when the job should run. Let's say it's like, I don't know, midnight every day, so the 0th hour. Those are all pretty easy. Where things get tricky is that the RHCE is basically the RHCSA exam, but with a little Ansible spiced on top. You have to write out now what is the command to copy those files, compress them, and store them. And oh yeah, it also needs to be a unique name. Well, you can always test that first before you try it out. Like here's our command where we are going to create a compressed file. We should get fancy about it and make it so that the file name is unique. So this is going to put date as part of that, which is going to make it nice. tar gzip, and of course we need to specify that it's etc. Once you're confident that you've got that command figured out, then it's simplicity itself, popping that inside of the play, and at this point we've solved task number 3. Should also be noted that whatever user you're using to SSH into these environments, that will be the user that will be creating that cron task. So if the task is telling you as a certain user, make sure this is being done, you may have to use certain keywords to change that. Question number 4. How can you create an Ansible playbook to disable password-based SSH authentication and enforce key-based authentication on all servers in accordance with a system-wide security policy? Well, before we start actually writing out the playbook, maybe we should take a look at where these changes actually need to be made. That is inside of the sshd config file, which I'm just opening up inside of one of the servers in question. So we need to take all lines that say password authentication yes, and that's going to need changed to password authentication no. And what we also need to do is that we need to make sure that pub key authentication is also set to yes. Now you can see here that this one does say yes, but hey, you don't know how many different servers you're working with. You want to ensure that all of them, regardless, will idempotently be set to whatever Boolean the step is telling you to. All right, so what's going to do this for us? Why, the lineinfile module, of course, where what this is going to do is that it's going to ensure that a particular line is in a file or replace an existing line. And here's where you're going to go, ugh! you're going to have to use regular expression in order to do that. I know, it is what it is. Fortunately, though, the regular expressions that you may have to use will not be super complicated, and the examples inside of the documentation will have lots for you to steal from, basically. So this very first example where it's trying to make sure that SE Linux is like set to enforcing, perfect. We can use that to make sure that our password authentication and our pub key authentication are set to no or yes, respectively. Just like this. Now, let's break down what those parameters are and why we set them to what they are. So path, you'll notice for both of these tasks, is the same file we were just looking at. It is the file to modify. This is a required parameter. For line, this is easy. This is the line that we are inserting, or in this case, replacing inside of the file. This is what we want it to look like after the playbook has run. So regex is never fun, and I want to show you very quickly why we're using the characters that we are, because absolutely Red Hat will look for any excuse to fail you just because you have incorrect regular expression. So when you have that vertical caret at the beginning, that means find any line that starts with whatever string you got here, password authentication. Now notice that's a match for this line, but it skips the second line because, as you saw, there are those pound signs in front of them. But if you put a caret then pound sign, now it matches on the second, doesn't match on the first. That question mark that we put there after the pound sign means, hey, that pound sign may or may not be there. But we want to find that line if it exists and starts with password authentication with or without that pound sign, and then we want to replace it with the line that you see here. Doesn't matter whether it's yes or no, we want to replace the whole line with password authentication no. And then we're doing the exact same thing with our pub key authentication line, and we want to make sure that's replaced with pub key authentication yes. Now just remember, if you took the RHCSA exam, you already know this because the RHCE is kind of the next step. But if your changes do not persist after reboot, or they have not been applied when it is being graded, then you're not going to get credit for the question. So after you make these changes, they will not kick in until the service has been restarted. So why not bust out the service module one more time and make sure the SSHD service is restarted, and therefore these changes are kicked in. Question number 5, and they aren't pulling any punches with this one. How would you design a new Ansible role for handling database backups, including tasks for creating backups, rotating old backups, and setting up the backup process to run on a schedule using cron? Oh man. So not only do we need to figure out all the tasks that does that, we also need to include that inside of a role. So before we start doing anything else, let's go ahead and create that role. Ansible Galaxy init. The task will probably tell you what the name of the role needs to be, but let's just call it DB backup for now. All right, that has been created successfully. And hopping inside of that directory that I just made, again, roles, when they are created, of course, have directories full of main.yaml files. I just want to show you that I am opening up tasks main.yaml, and that's the only file that I'm going to need to edit inside of this particular solution. All right, so let's sketch out what tasks do we need to do here. Well, first, we are going to need to actually create that database backup in the first place before we can do anything else with it. What we're also going to need to do is we need to rotate our old backups, and then we are going to need to make sure that we delete any of those old backups as well. All right, and what's important about this is that we are going to use not the command module, but the shell module. Make sure you understand the difference between the two, because while they both allow commands, only the shell module is going to work for what we're about to do. So we need to write this command, mysql dump user root, or whatever it is that we're provided inside of the actual task. We are providing a password, which normally you would be prompt for, but hey, unless it explicitly states that you are supposed to put your password as like something that's encoded by Ansible Vault or anywhere else, you can just go ahead and say, all right, I'll just hard code that in there because that's best practice. And then the name of the database itself. So let's say it's MyDB. Now, here's where we need to make sure that we're using the shell module for this, because we want to take that and we want to redirect, write that output using that greater than sign, which is only possible if you are using the shell module. This would not work with command. And we would then use that to write it to whatever location we're told, naming it whatever it is that we want to name it. It's really worth memorizing this syntax to make sure that it is going to be a unique file name by including the date inside of it somewhere. So there you go. That's going to be our shell command. I'm going to wrap that inside of double quotes, just like that. All right, moving on to the next task. We now need to rotate our old backups. But to rotate those backups, we need to find those backups that meet a certain criteria. So here we're going to bust out the find module. And here we go. This looks pretty close. Find blah, blah, blah files older than blah, blah, blah. Yeah, sounds good. Let's go ahead and move that over, and then let's break down what each of those parameters means. Paths required parameter, which can be a list if you want, but we were told just to look through this one particular directory / backup. The meaning behind age, I hope, is pretty obvious, but if you're not writing the parameters out correctly, you're not going to get credit for it. So for age, you can choose seconds, minutes, hours, days, or weeks by specifying the first letter of any of those words. So that's why we're going to do 7D, 7 days. We have recurse set to yes or true, either one would be fine. But when we set that to yes, it means that, hey, do we want to descend into any subdirectories or anything inside of there? Because yes, we were supposed to look through all of that. Now, that will find all of those matches for us, but the actual next step is to delete them. So we are going to use the register keyword to hold on to that information for us for when we delete it in the next task. Now, this is certainly something you could figure out by using debug and just sort of printing out, hey, what's inside of that registered variable. That's a perfectly valid way to go about doing it. But you can also go to the return values section of the documentation, and what is going to be captured inside of that registered keyword old backups is files. That is going to be a list of all of the matches. So inside of old backups.files should be the list of all of those matched, well, old files. And as far as deleting those goes, again, try to avoid using non-idempotent modules like shell unless you absolutely cannot avoid it. The file module will be perfectly fine for deleting this. After all, it's about creating or destroying or modifying files. So what we're going to have to do, because the number of files we get back is going to be a variable amount every single time, is that we are going to need to loop this task. We need to run this as many times as there are matching old 7-day files, and all of them need to be made absent. So the way that we write out the Jinja expression for that, remember, files was that returned value that's inside of our registered keyword old backups. That's a list. We can loop over that very easy. So item.path, path is again one of those return values that you can find inside of the file module here. Yep, there it is. So it's not magic where we're getting this from. All of these values are inside of the documentation. Now, again, the design here is supposed to be for a role. This would then need to be called on a schedule using cron. So it's kind of an awkwardly phrased question, but we would then need to write a playbook that would call this role. So what would that look like? Well, let's assume that we've got this file backup.yaml here. Inside of that, we have a task which is going to include role DB backup. That's the role that we just made that did all the things that we just worked down. And then what we would do is that we would idempotently ensure, again, using the cron module like we did in a previous task, make sure that at a certain time of the day, basically, hey, just run that playbook. And that's how we would go about making the role and then calling it in a playbook that runs that role as part of a cron task. Question number 6, they're throwing us a bit of a curveball, because what this is about to do is that it is going to test our ability to recall not modules, but keywords. Here's the question. How can you set up a playbook in Ansible to retry a specific task that is known to fail often with a certain delay between each retry attempt? So on the left, here's my playbook. We're using the command module, very uncreative. There's some unreliable task that's not going to work every single time. All right, so we're going to work backwards. Those are the 4 keywords that we need to know. And if you can memorize all those, well, great. You can take you and your superior brain and go pass this exam without my help. But for the rest of us mere mortals who don't recall every single one of the dozens of keywords that Ansible has, here's what you can do. Use Ansible doc-t, so type, we want to look up keywords-l list. Give us a list of all the, -t stands for task. Give us the task level keywords that are available. And the 4 that we're looking at there, retries. Number of retries before giving up in an until loop. This setting is only used in combination with until. So until, which is that last keyword we see there, says this keyword implies a retries loop that will go on until the condition supplied here is met or until we hit the retries limit. So basically we want to keep going until result.rc, that means return code, is equal to 0, which means that the command runs without error. Now result, we're getting that from our register keyword, which is very common. The name of the variable that will contain task status, module return data, blah, blah, blah. That's what's going to hold that RC value. That is a return value of the command module. And then delay, that is the number of seconds to delay between retries. So if again, we were to go back now and armed with the knowledge we have, reading this line by line, we're going to execute this command. We're going to retry it a maximum number of 5 times. And we'll keep going until we've done it 5 times or the command has succeeded. We'll keep track of whether or not the command has succeeded by registering its output, and we'll use that as our condition here. And we're also going to space it out. We're going to put a 10-second delay each time that we try to retry this unreliable task. Question number 7. How can you automate the installation of updates on a group of servers using the YAML module in Ansible, but exclude kernel updates to prevent interruptions? So the YAML module is very frequently used. It's pretty easy, but of course they had to throw a curveball at here. We want to exclude certain types of packages being updated. Well, you know what we need to do. We need to take a look at the YAML module docs. Well, first of all, we aren't dinosaurs here. It's not the YAML module, it's the DNF module. Ugh. So let's go ahead, open that up, and let's take a look here. What we need to do here is exclude things from being part of our updates. So we can always do a / followed by a keyword that you're searching for, exclude. There we go. And this is the one we're looking for. We're looking for package name or names to exclude when state is equal to present or latest. This can be a list or a comma separated string. Now, something that's not explicitly mentioned there inside of that particular documentation is what we can also do with this, is that we can just say, hey, regarding all packages that we want to update to the latest version, we want to exclude any packages that start with kernel. followed by an asterisk, which means that we can use wildcards here. Let's just exclude anything that starts with kernel followed by anything else, and this would be our solution to question number 7. Question number 8. How can you use Ansible's firewalld module to manage role-specific firewall rules across multiple servers, ensuring that rules are applied based on the role of each server? Wow, that's a mouthful. Well, first of all, how are we supposed to know what servers are within each role? For the sake of this demonstration, let me show you what's inside of our inventory file here. Check it out. We have 2 different groups of 4 total machines. One group called web nodes, the other one called DB nodes. So basically, we want to write a playbook that can run against all 4 of these, but when it is a web-based device, it has one set of firewall rules, but when it's a database-based device, it adheres to a different set of rules. We're going to swing back to that in just a bit. But the question was kind enough to tell us what module we're supposed to use here, which is the firewalld module. This allows for the addition or deletion of services and ports in either running or permanent firewalld rules. And as I'm fond of doing, if I zip down to the examples, there's one that's pretty close to what we want. We want to be able to open specific ports, allow traffics in, I guess the default zone, because it's not telling us what zone we're supposed to use here, right? So let's get that copied over and let's see what we can do with it. All right, so taking a look at 2 different ways that we're going to use firewalld. First, we're taking a look at our HTTP service. So our service parameter, name a service to add or remove to or from firewalld. For that second task, instead of a service, we have port. So the name of the port or port range. And note that for this, you do have to phrase it in the form of port 3306 / followed by protocol. So this is TCP. For both of these, state is enabled, meaning that these ports should accept. And for permanent, this needs to be set to yes in order for this to persist after reboot. Again, these exams are pretty dastardly in the sense that if these fixes do not persist upon reboot, you don't get credit for it. And note that the default parameter for this is false, which means not including this particular parameter would result in you not getting credit for this task. But we're still not done yet, because the thing is that these tasks do need to be conditional. They should only run against the specified groups. So once again, showing you the inventory here, check it out. For our web nodes, we're going to add this when condition to our first task. When web is inside of the group name. Aha, that's why it's called web nodes. And conversely, the second task, which should only be run against our DB nodes, will add the condition when DB is in group_names. So group_names is another one of those reserved variable names that you really should be familiar with, because you're going to need to know it for tasks like this. Question number 9. How can you utilize Ansible's template module to generate a configuration file with dynamic variables that are specific to each environment, development, staging, production for a web application deployment? Oh boy, the template module. All right, so you're definitely going to need to know some Jinja 2 for when you are taking the exam. And what that's going to mean is that you're going to build everything for this task inside of a specific directory. And inside of that directory, you should make a directory, subdirectory called templates. It's inside of here that we're going to be doing our initial work. So inside of this, we're going to call this file config.j2. Remember, the J2 extension is not required, but it is recommended as a best practice sort of thing. So as for what's supposed to be inside of this, I realize the questions are very vague, but we are exploring what sort of skills you need in order to satisfy questions like this. So let's just for now say that there are these 3 different fields: environment, database host, and database port, all of which need to be different according to whether we are in development, staging, or production. And in this simple Jinja 2 example we're using here, more specific examples of which are, of course, inside of our full course, we're just going to replace them with variables: environment, DB host, and DB port. Fortunately enough, the template module itself is easy enough to use. It's writing the template that's far more difficult. And the only two fields that we really need are source, where's the J2 file that we're reading in, and destination, where are we saving the completed file after it has been created. So let's just steal that first example and let's start plugging in some values there. All right, so there we go. We're pointing to that J2 file that we already made, and for destination, this is something that would be provided by the actual task itself. So this file, whatever winds up going inside of it, is going to be placed at some remote node path, and that's what you need to insert at that point. Now, what you're going to need to do is decide, all right, how are those variables going to get defined after all? Because inside of config.j2, we've got the variables environment, DB host, and DB port. And who's to say? These may be coming from a file, they may be defined inside of an inventory, and we've seen inventory definitions, or maybe it's just something that needs to be passed in with a -e. So regardless, these variables are being defined, and here let's just assume -e environment is equal to production, DB hosts is equal to dbo1.example.com, DB ports is 3306. We'll pass those in as the command line, which will define those variables here inside of vars. So when those are defined, that means that those values are ultimately going to show up inside of these placeholders inside of our remote environment. And here's our 10th and final question. How can you use an Ansible playbook to assign unique host names to each server in your company based on their IP addresses? All right, this one is interesting because what we're going to be using first is we're going to be using gather facts. Now, gather facts, if you don't include this line at all, will automatically be set to yes, but this is a case where we definitely want to make sure we are explicitly stating, yes, we do need to gather facts here. Because when gather facts runs inside of remote hosts, it gathers all sorts of different information, including IP addresses. So just so that we can kind of see what we're working with here, I'm going to use debug in order to print out the Ansible default IPv4 variable. When we run that, let's take a look. All right, and there you go. So inside of that IPv4, we can see that there is a key called address, and the value is the actual IP address in question. So IPv4.address would return just that value by itself, which I'll show you right here, right now. All right, very cool. Now, problem is that you cannot use dots inside of these host names. So we're going to need to take that and we're going to have to change it up a little bit. So here's where the next skill is going to come in. We need to use a Jinja 2 filter. And if you never used filters before, and I know it's kind of awkward because it's wrapping around here, what you do is you add a pipe, like you see right there, followed by what's basically a function. Replace is a filter that what it will do is that it will take that IP address that you see there, and it will replace first all periods. We're surrounding it by quotation marks. That's what makes it a string. That first value is an argument. So we're saying, hey, replace filter. The first thing I want you to do is you need to grab all the periods, comma. Now for the second argument, what are we going to replace it with? I want that replaced with dashes. So if we were to run that now with that filter in place, let's see what happens when we run this one more time. Haha. Leaving that in there just to show that everybody makes mistakes sometimes. Let's use MSG here and let's get some Jinja 2 actual action going on. All right, there we go. So that time it actually kicked in, because that would only work if it were inside of curly braces. So if you find that it's not working, use debug. That's intentionally left in there as a great lesson to make sure that you got things figured out before you take it to the next step. Because the last thing that we need to do is that now we need to assign this as a host name. Well, that is exactly what the host name module is for. Set system's host name, supports yada, yada, yada. The only field that we really need to worry about is that first one, name of host. So what we'll do is that we'll go back to our task. Let's actually give this a proper name. We are going to rename the host. We are going to make sure that this is the host name module, and we're changing that to name. Now, chances are you may want the host name to actually be like host dash followed by the IP address, whatever that might be. If that's what's specified inside of the actual task itself, then this is what would do the job. And this would rename each individual host, no matter how many they are, something unique, because each one of our nodes is going to have their own IPv4 address, and this will solve our 10th and final task. Whoa, Nelly gang, that was a lot. And there's certainly much, much more that this exam can chuck at you besides what you've seen in this video. But if this video did help you and you want more help that's just like it, do yourself a favor and check out that link in the description for Alta 3 Academy, which includes full lessons featuring me, labs, the same command line that you saw me using here, plus dozens more mock exam tasks, plus AI assistance, all in one location. Best of luck on your exams, everyone. We'll see you next time.